we're back on and we'll see what happens. Of course, naturally, a little glitch. Good old Skype and the universe. But considering we're chatting at each other, several thousand miles apart, it's perfectly okay. But we're back a little bit. I think what I was discussing before we kind of went off air for a second is just that idea of uh, how lucky musicians are who have had this commingling of experience and even training as per your own improvisatory and jazz interests. And then again, it just blows me away that you also are and have been at least a professional trombonist, and of course now faculty professional and all that. So it's things are better. I'm happy. I feel that I'm kind of the Neanderthal because of the way I did focus on one direction and found everything else just unacceptable.
Yeah, well, there's another way of looking at that because, like I remember coming to Boston and being at Ron Barron's house. He was principal trombone of the BSO, and I got to know those guys well and had a chance to play with them quite a bit, which I'm grateful for. But Ron, he was like, he lived in trombone world, classical trombone. And there's a beauty to that in doing one thing,
Mm-hmm.
you know, to be at that level and just have that one. But he said the same thing. You're doing all these different things. And I said, well, Ron, I admire you because you've had done this for 40 years at the highest conceivable level. And there's a great beauty to that single. So it really comes down to an individual, sensibility. And
And the truth is that the other truth is the reality of Gunther Schuller's concept, where he himself said, these are going to mesh jazz, improvisation, so-called art music. It's all going to mesh together, and that's especially in Europe. I see it. I mean, they're
yeah,
stunning musicians in Europe that can sit down and play the keyboard till it bursts into flame in terms of improvisatory work, and then do whatever, do
yeah.
partita.
I you mentioned Gunther, and I played a lot of concerts under him with the Pro Artie Orchestra,
Mm.
and in Boston. He was quite an amazing man, and I really enjoyed him. But you're quite right because he wrote, he wrote 12. He had his 12-tone pieces, but then he wrote jazz pieces, and I remember once going to play Gershwin under him, and we came in, and he's like, "What are you bringing those trombones in for?" It's like, "What? Those won't go. You get me an older, smaller horn." He was very blunt. I love
Wow.
because he wanted it almost like the early music people. They want you
Yeah.
playing on authentic instruments, and A is 427. Gunther's like they weren't playing on these big cannons in
Mm.
1930, so we had to go out and find these real old trombones to play
Wow.
American. So we did, you know.
And that, as you and I both know, that's not eccentric. That's getting to the sound, to the core
Correct.
of what was.
That's
That
exactly
of
it.
that period, all of it, just like tempi, are very, very important. Now we know better and better about tempos. I'm thinking of Rhapsody in Blue, for example. It's a very fast
Yeah,
piece. And when you hear the band, the Goldman band play it.
yeah.
So
Gunther was.
it's all really wonderful. Let's get back to your CD,
Yeah,
however. And
absolutely.
let's talk Boyd's, okay? Let's just kind of go through. I'm going to pull down to where I, made my notes, but let's just start at let me see if there's anything I should have asked you, about family. So I think we're pretty well uh, done. I don't think I need to ask you details of, when somebody stuck a trombone in your face and all that. We don't need that. Let's
Was
get
eight.
right to it. Well, what? What? You have a story?
I was 8. Well, my dad was the trombone teacher at Interlochen music camp for 30 years, so I never had a
No
chance.
wonder. Yeah,
It was
no wonder.
preordained.
I thought maybe, it's where, like, for me, when I was in fourth grade or something, they play a movie and then they, boys and girls, would you like to play piccolo? Would you like to? No, you had a dad who, of course, he's going to slam a trombone into your face
Yeah.
and then insist that you become principal trombone of the Miami Philharmonic. I mean, come on. Let's look at 13 Ways. This is the first set. And you did mention haiku. I'm so glad because they're short. The poems are very short and very interesting, very esoteric again, and that's good. 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird. poetry by American Wallace Stevens. Amazing. I've heard of Wallace Stevens over the years. I'm not illiterate. I like to read literature and poetry and stuff, but I guess I've never really, plunged into Wallace Stevens. Let's do, and I'm going to pull some of these up because the poetry is so glorious. The first piece, the beginning of the poem is among 20 snowy mountains. And as you, I think, mentioned a couple, 3, 4 minutes ago, talk about imagery
Yes.
that jumps into your head. So my real question is, then again, this very kind of esoteric uh, piano and baritone work. See what I'm trying to say? I'm trying to figure out how you made imagery of that kind of words imagery, how it came to you.
Yeah, well, so you're trying to convey this kind of expansive, bleak landscape, right? And so again, I am looking, you know, I talk to students, I think about this, my choice of like, okay, what's the chordal, how is this going to start? What's the chordal structure? What language am I going to use? And it's, you just sit with the poem for a while. And I tend, especially in something like this, I'll write at the piano. I'll be there and I'll be, it's not random. I'm using, so I might have, I don't want to get too technical, but I might be using a specific chordal structure. And the decision you make, I always tell students this, should I use this note or that note in the chord? Should the melody go here or there? It's going to be based on everything you've heard and studied in your life. And that's why nothing's wasted. And I use the analogy, if you're a writer, what adjective are you going to use? Mm-hmm. It's going to be based on everything you've read. If you're a painter, how do you know? My daughter's an artist. How do you know what shade of green you want in that thing? You're going to make a value judgment at that point, and it's going to be based on, you have this gigantic palette of sounds, colors, textures through all your years of study. It doesn't need to be all used. It doesn't have to be complicated. But I tell, it's nice to have it there. Maybe you want black and white. Okay, good, use that. Ask Hemingway, right? So, but maybe you want, so maybe I've heard a lot of, I heard this, I build this chord, sometimes I'll write it, and afterwards I'll say, oh my God, I didn't do it consciously, but that's from the Rite of Spring, that gesture. Well, I've played the right, that's one advantage of playing in a symphony orchestra. I've played all of Stravinsky and Mahler and Bruckner and Schoenberg, you know, and so it's in here somewhere, but I'm not consciously thinking, you'll do it, you play it back, and it's like, yeah, that seems, that was one measure too long. Why? That's an internal judgment, right? So I'm trying to set up an environment, and so some of the movements are very spare. There's one movement, "Oh Men of Hadam" or something. I set the opening of that. It was all open fifths, and then it was like, well, actually, that sounds like it's something of a Copland song I heard once. But I wasn't imitating it, but I said, yeah, that's the sound I want. It's very austere, and it's wide open. And so I know how to do, again, that's part of training. How do I convey that sensibility? Well, if you have the, colors in your palette, you do that. So you're not imitating it specifically, but it's going to be Britain is in here, and Copeland in here, and Barber's in there,
and somebody else is in there, that in your CD that you don't even know, maybe, but he's a friend of mine, and I immediately went, that reminds me of so and so's piece. So it's not, it's just it's string theory, stuff.
Yeah.
The various universes pass through your brain. You know what I'm trying to say. And by the way,
there, yeah, a lot of neurons.
And you mentioned systems, I think, at some point earlier. And I'm looking at this 13 haiku, if you will, very short poems. And I do want to read one or two. Is there and you've already made it clear that with training and your own experience and stuff that you I think I understood you and I and we all like a kind of order, a kind of sensibility to what
Yeah,
the end product is. Is there a system, tonal or otherwise, in any way involved in this series of 13
yeah, not throughout, but in some, I will use set theory, which is Bartok. I teach that, so I have a collection of intervals. It's not tonal, it's not atonal. It's a set of intervals that are going to govern the specific pitch relationships melodically and harmony in that particular work. And you'll find this in like these small Bartok pieces I've played, and you can analyze them and say, yeah, that gives the work a consistency. In others, I'm working within almost a Debussy realm, where I'm using half diminished chords and whatnot that are consistent in Locrian scales. And a big thing I use personally, and this comes from jazz, I don't take it in the jazz world, but I love Bill Evans and I know what he's doing. He's using modes, combined modes under certain chords. Now I'm not doing that. I might doing that when I'm improvising in a jazz solo, but you can also take it to in a classical world and build structures out of that language. And the other one is Messiaen too. If you start picking that stuff apart, there are systems underlying it in certain scales, which I'm very fond of, octatonic scales, which they call diminished scales in jazz. And I teach my students this, and it's like, wow. So actually, I use that scale a lot. I use an octatonic scale, but it's disguised. But I will bow to Messiaen on that because I'm an organist too, and then so a lot of Messiaen's work, once you pull it apart, it's like, oh my God, there's just two major chords, one's in C and one's in G flat, and it sounds really complex, but I love that.
you and you mentioned Bartok. You mentioned Bartok, and I'm thinking of microcosmos in
Yes,
terms of ordered systems, ordered
correct.
compositional systems.
Yeah,
So therefore, let me make sure I understood, so we can move on a little bit.
yeah,
These 13 glorious little moments for baritone and piano in a very contemporary genre, if you will, in terms of tonality and the movement. Um, you did look at this as a totality. You did order and work with sounds and where they go and what how things move. Yeah. And
yes, and they're different because it having these different because the whole poem is about perspective. So you're seeing things in different ways. So if you have one language that's like Copland and another like
hmm,
Messiaen and another that's more Debussyan, actually that reflects the sensibility of the poem on a deep level because they're looking at this one bird from 13 different ways in different settings. So it actually, I can't say that was consciously in the beginning. I planned that, but I think like a lot of art, it kind of evolves organically out of the process. You
exactly.
know?
And you also probably, no doubt, I'm projecting as a composer, recognize at a certain point you begin to recognize how this organism is beginning to
Yes,
uh,
much like a
shape itself.
writer. Yeah,
Yeah,
when you hear,
exactly right.
well, I love listening to really good novelists
I've got the
talk.
lights in here. I'm going to put them up a bit because Wallace Stevens. I'm going to have to really look into Wallace Stevens. But let
Me
me just
too.
throw a couple at everybody, or one anyway. Yeah, okay. Here's one. Uh, I'm getting old. I have to turn the lights up so I can see. It's number two. It's the second piece. I was of three minds. And by the way, I love the formulas that I'm hearing already, even in the title, and also on the first one, the mountains. There's
Yeah,
a number, there's a count. Here, let me just read it. I was of three minds, like a tree in which there are three blackbirds.
yeah.
And I went, huh?
again,
because they
it's
go
a
on and on like that. Life is and I'm going here in the universe, and my blackbirds are out front, or so. I mean, it just goes. That's why, as I mentioned to you earlier, I can't decide sometimes whether I'm having my leg pulled a little bit or what. Can you help me get through these 13 wonderful little
yeah,
poems?
again, I think it's just you are simply looking at. I don't think there's like some super underlying meaning. He's just looking at one object from different points of view, like we all do constantly, and just kind of admiring it, and that's all there is. Period. End of story. So there are. It's a poem to me on perspective. It's
You've
like
helped me a lot. You've mentioned perspective repeatedly about
yeah,
this piece, and that helps save me because my intellect, that part of my head, was getting really messed up on these little haiku, which tends to
because
do that anyway.
what the continuity is, it's just the blackbird. That's 13
Yeah,
ways of looking at it. So you're not changed. There aren't 13 objects. There's 13. That you can take that as far. You could even extrapolate it to if an Inuit looks at snow, they have 13 different ways. We just see snow, but
right.
they have word. They're seeing what we can't see because so
They
it's
see
a
the subtleties of generations and generations of something that we see as white snow. They have in generations discovered the
correct. It's
subtleties of
hard.
what.
Yeah, we don't have that sensibility. Just like in the music of India, who says a half step's the smallest distance between two pitches? That's just a Western
Yeah.
European thing. They're hearing all kinds of stuff. Our ears aren't, but it's like we can't speak Hindi either. Well, they learned that language since they were born. You
Let me
know.
see if I can find one more because I had it for a minute, and again, uh, my eyesight is just not what it used to be when I was 12. Uh, oh, I had it. It doesn't matter, but I really because what we've really discussed is these unique imagery
yeah,
of students and how to. I guess what I think you've helped me to understand when the music when about a system about an intellect to its progressions that this kind of system evolves as you move into the piece. Am I pieces, if
yeah,
you will?
yeah. The image is suggesting a certain
Thank
uh, um, sonic universe, right? I'm going to translate this image into sound in some way that enhances it, right? And so, what is the image? What am I feeling? And then kind of let my whole whatever's accumulated over here over these decades, just come out and it's like, oh, that works. That yeah, that works.
Yeah.
Or you go back the next day, it's like, yeah, no, that
Mhm.
didn't work as well. But let me
That's
try something.
composition. I mean,
Yeah,
that's being a composer, isn't it?
yeah,
The things we never see in your notebooks and the stuff that's on the floor,
correct.
as you look.
That's the danger of the internet. So you don't see Beethoven's manuscripts,
Yeah.
and all the trouble he had at it. Yeah,
Let's move ahead, but I think that discussion of those first 13 little tracks on the CD really have helped kind of give everybody, including our own professional colleagues in composition, so just because everybody has their process, has
yeah,
or not even. So I'm really really glad you helped kind of get me clear on this. Let's move on to Great Gray Owl, Annie Finch, American composer, American poet. Um, Let me just throw this out. Piano sets a lilting mood. It has a kind of lilt. I think somehow that this is where I began to hear the jazz in you. Am I
yeah,
anywhere close? Um, and then again, this kind of high-ish. Not really extraordinary. It ain't Heldenleben or anything, but this
yeah.
kind of high tessitura for baritone, and very difficult writing, as you mentioned. Um, let's see. Let's tell us a little bit about Great Gray Owl and how did you discover this Annie Finch poem? Did you?
Again, it was in a book by Billy Collins. Once I got on this kind of idea of doing uh, uh, a bunch of songs about birds. Where then it's like, okay, I wonder how I can find that. So I just started doing research, and then Billy Collins is, he was poet laureate. He's a wonderful poet and kind of America's poet, and he has a book called Bright Wings, which is a collection of poems about birds from the Roman times up to yesterday with illustrations by Sibley. So you can actually look up a bird and find there's a poem written about it in 1200 and there's another in 1732. And it's fascinating little book. I recommend it highly. And so I was just leafing through there and that one struck me. And as you said, it's kind of a light poem. It's just kind of lovely about the great gray owl. And
Yeah.
I thought, well, this is not some heavy duty thing, and it just conveyed, and it conveyed a more, as you said, almost a more jazz influence, Ellingtonian
Love
uh,
that.
kind of language.
Hmm.
So it seemed to fit the sensibility of the poem. So I kind of started with that, and that kind of led me in that direction, and that
And,
seemed like, so
and
it's
it's
not
a
a
fabulous.
jazz
It's
tune as such, but it's not a classical art song. It's somewhere in the middle, if I may.
and it's quite an interesting, quite an intimate narrative in
Yeah,
a way. Let me just read a little bit of it. Again, Annie Finch. Um, who knew you would grow from gray bark so that nothing is separate or new, but your yellow eyes following through from the mottling brown in the dark. I'm having trouble because I can't see,
yeah,
so otherwise I'd be much more eloquent. Um, Special owl from the spiral, the spark that the circling feathers lead to, and so on. I mean, these are just word images upon word images about an owl,
yeah.
which is,
They're
by
very,
the way, a very special animal anyway in legend and myth and
yeah,
symbolism and all the rest.
yeah.
So you're happy with that one? That I liked
I,
it, and
and it has a little, it has some WC in there. There's a sense of,
and
yeah,
now that you mention it, you've gone from quite the thinking as we work our way through this CD. You've gone from rather esoteric. Can we say that? Not to
yeah,
abuse the
yeah,
word too much more. The 13 pieces on blackbirds, little pieces on blackbirds. Then the great gray owl, as we just discussed, is a whole different temperament,
yeah.
of course. And then Yeats. Oh, Yeats. I am going to have to go back and read Yeats. I was um, really, really moved. The Wild Swans at Cool.
Yeah. It's a
And
man.
just to remind everybody, you gave us the dates, but 1865, 1939. Wow. To live in Britain, in Europe, in
Yeah,
that time, and mercifully he was spared World War II.
yeah,
If you get my
yeah,
drift, but he must have seen it coming. This is the longest. It's over 8 minutes. This piece.
yeah.
Go ahead. Tell me a little bit. The piano line is soaring, imaginative. These are kind of my notes that I'll try and distill into a review. But the Yeats text is inspiring, and Swanson dives into the imagery fabulously. The piano line is fabulous, soaring, imaginative. It speaks.
Well, thank you, sir. I just have to thank Yates for that. Because
Fair enough. Fair enough, partially, but you, you're
you listen,
escaping your responsibility, which is that, of course, Yeats is responsible for the inspiration that inspired you, but you're the one that put this really beautiful piece together harmonically and in terms of
yeah, thank you. It's
melody.
it has uh, quartal elements which are Hindemithyan in a certain way, um, but I also I adore Brahms. Um, some of the linear writing, and I find I'm not using his harmonic vocabulary, but at some deep level, I almost play Brahms all at night when I'm just around. I don't know. It just, uh, and when I played in a symphony, I love, he knew how to write for trombones.
And by the way, it's a perfect temperament, if you will, what you just kind of described, the kind of Brahmsian, if I've got you right, a temperament to this piece. And it's Yeats, after all. You know what I'm
Yeah,
saying? We're talking 19th century, the heart
yeah,
of the romantic
yeah.
late 19th century. Yeah.
So I'm not writing. I'm not writing in in a language of Brahms. I'm not writing in a neo-romantic language. It's a little, but again, Hindemith comes to mind. I like chordal structures and manipulating them, and that seemed to fit this piece. And also, there's other Brahmsian elements where he loves doing three against two, and I those have seeped into my writing, and I
Yeah.
realized and it seemed this piece is so noble and majestic, and you know that that somehow, if I can somehow capture that in the musical language and do it justice, to some small extent. So it's a responsibility when you take on a poem that's that great. You feel a
Exactly.
certain, like I can, I I want to honor this poem. I don't want to just, you know,
Well, the thing is, every time this is, I realize when I receive the CD, uh, anything involving text is going to be more, from my point of view, even in terms of seeing the big picture, it's it's going to be very much more complex and very much more about idiom and about consciousness about text and narrative and so on, which makes it so much more fascinating and interesting. But Wild Swans is gorgeous. And I'm just trying to think so people get an idea. It's kind of hard to. I hope I don't wreck it again. But here we go. I'll just read this one stanza. The 19th autumn has come upon me since I first made my count. I saw about before I had well finished. All suddenly mount and scatter, wheeling in great broken rings upon their clamorous wings. I mean, you can do. I mean, just
yeah,
the
it's
imagery is stunning about owls.
mm,
And then earlier I kind of muffed the reading, but we all have seen the pictures where owls blend into the texture of the bark, if you will. I mean,
yeah,
they're that kind of magical creature. Okay.
very
All
vivid
right,
image. Mm.
now we have to come to grips with the last part of the CD, which is just such a treat. I was not expecting it. As I probably mentioned to you off,
Good.
I was not expecting it. Um, Peace. Now let's talk about Peace. Horace Silver, is that the composer? Because now we're
Yeah,
talking just.
yeah. Horace Silver, who passed away about 5 years ago, was one of the great jazz pianists, very beloved figure in the history of jazz. He had the Jazz Messengers. He was in the 50s and 60s and 70s. He's a very beloved figure. And one of his Song for My Father is a famous one of his tunes. But he has this tune called Peace, and I've always adored it. It's very, very sophisticated harmonic work, really interesting chordal structure. And the reason that happened was we had finished the recording, and Richard Price, he said, "Well, Phil, we still got a half hour." So I said, well, as long as you're here and you came all the way from, connect, let me just play a tune. And so, he said, what? I said, I don't know. Let me just play. So I just played that off the top of my head. He said, let me just play it, and I'll improvise a couple of choruses. I love this tune. So I played it, and he said, that was great. Just don't do anything. Just leave it on there. And I said, do you think, he says, it's a nice transition between the classical art songs and the jazz tunes. You've got this solo piano piece in the middle. And then what I realized, so he just put it on there, and it's like, okay, I'm a jazz artist. Just record it, put it on. No cuts, please. No editing. And and then I didn't even listen back to it. It was like, I trust him. Yeah, throw it on. You liked it? Good. But then it occurred to me the next day that I hadn't planned this because the piece just popped into my head. Um, Actually, the the symbol of peace is the dove, which is a bird. So it's
Ah,
almost like no, it's like wait a minute, I just played another bird without even realizing till the next day. So
by the way, now let me jump in. By the way, you have just described how the universe works in terms of inspiration. If I've got this right, you're all done. It's like, oh, well, we got some time to fill. We'll sit down, and what pops into your head is a tune that you love and adore, the Horace Silver piece of black jazz musician, I think, if I
oh
recall.
yeah, for
Uh,
sure.
and then I've got a question for you about it. But that, and then later you go, oh, hey, this imagery of a dove and so on. Yeah, perfect, it worked somehow. See what I mean? The gods are at work. The creative gods are at work.
Some things that work, yeah.
I wanted to ask you because I've made the note. Again, we're talking about peace. This solo piano piece. I asked myself here on my notes. Is it an homage? Is it how much is improvised? How much is written down? How does that work? It sounds
Oh
like it's
no,
totally improvised.
yeah, it's a 10 bar tune, which I just harmonize. I
Uh-huh.
mean, there's no piece written out, work written out. There's just the melody and the chord changes, which you play, and then I just improvise three choruses on that chordal structure or two. And so I can't even tell you what I played. You know, I don't know. It seems okay, but again, that's just the language I've spoken for decades. So you just you're because to me improvising is just composing without editing. you know you're creating it and there's no editing. It
If
didn't
you have the
exist.
talent, which I don't,
It
unfortunately, I'm a
didn't
lousy
exist for
improvisator.
for composing. It can either be okay or not very good, but hopefully it's people might enjoy it. It's a wonderful work.
Yes, it
It's
is. Yeah,
great
very,
tune.
very nice. I was, as I said, and remember, I've just finished explaining to you that I was Mr. White Tie and Tailcoat, okay, for decades,
Cool. Yeah.
convinced that that you had to have X education and study X repertoire and just the square box thing. So I'm glad to say I've mellowed considerably, and that's just a beautiful, beautiful piece of improvisation around this piece. Skylark, Hoagie Carmichael, Johnny Mercer. Even I have heard of Hoagie Carmichael.
Yeah.
Uh, Song, and again, we're talking song. Sitting around the piano and standing around the piano, Gary singing the tune and lyric, and you playing the piano part. Wait a moment. Yeah, okay, and wonderful. I assume it's the original song. Are there any compositional tweaks? It sounded just
Yeah, no,
straight out of
again,
the.
I how this works is like on a gig. Gary, let's do Skylark. Great. So I have the thing out of the real book. It's got the melody and it's got the changes. It doesn't have it written,
Yeah, of
but
course.
you're supposed to know how to do that, right? Just like if you're a Baroque harpsichord player, you have the bass line and the continuo part, and you're supposed to know how to fill in the chords.
Quite.
This is you have the melody and you have the chord changes and you're supposed to know how to fill out the chords. So that's just what we did. Again, I can't tell you exactly what I did. I'd have to go back and listen to it, but hopefully, and we're playing off each other. We say, all right, I'll give you an intro, 8 bars, and you sing it, and I'll follow, and boom. So those were pretty much just one take things. There's no editing on those.
Good. Otherwise, it could be trouble. I'm glad I asked. You know what I mean? When something is spontaneous, it works. When you start tweaking it, it's doing two or three or
Exactly.
four takes. It
Yeah, exactly.
becomes deadly. You know.
Those are just tunes out of the Great American Songbook, as it's called.
Baltimore Oriole. I tell you, this tune really got me. This piece, and of course, probably everybody and their grandchildren know it, but I just love the Hoagie Carmichael again. I got a little lost. Hoagie Carmichael, Paul Francis Webster. I mean, give me a chronology here as the classical guy, lost in classic. Who are these guys? We know Hoagie Carmichael,
Yeah,
but
I
Hoagie
have no idea. Somebody wrote the words, who we don't know. I
Carmichael. Uh-huh.
should know. If it was a class, I'd know, but all I know, it's a great tune.
Hey, and by the way, we are hearing scat, aren't we?
Yeah, oh yeah,
From Web.
Gary does that.
what
It's
brilliant scat singing. It's
yeah,
just
he
such a treat when it's done right. That got me all excited hearing scat done well and knowing that is more this is not a setup or it's in nature
no,
this is
no,
fully
he's
uh,
improvising,
recorded.
and
Yeah.
it's not usual to hear a classical baritone who can scat really well.
Yeah,
You,
and you can always tell when there's nothing when at least I think I'm just projecting, but it seems to me as though scat is one of those things where you've either got it innately or or with years of experience, or it just somehow never comes off right. So the
yeah,
idea of Gary singing scat, well, we're talking about a guy who really knows how to sing scat. I mean,
yeah, you have to have a jazz rhythmic feel, and that's
yeah,
one of the problems classical musicians have often. Is because I played in the Boston Pops for a bunch of years, and if you're trained classically, it's hard to
it
swing.
is.
It's
Yeah,
not that it's bad, but you're just if you're not used to that. So
it's an embarrassment to loosen up and twist your butt. How's
yeah,
that?
or it
You're
just
a
isn't
classical guy
coming
playing fiddle.
to you
And then you
rhythmically.
get all embarrassed. But I think we're moving along, and that's what I just described is
Yeah,
something from 20, 30 years ago. I think now I can see it, and young musicians in professional
yeah,
orchestras are
yeah.
much more
That's
able now.
dividing line. You're
Good old
right.
Schul, good old Gunther Schuller again. I loved because I'm kind of like a kid in a candy store, considering, as I said, all my directions are elsewhere, and then this whole last bit of just wonderful club songs. Like that's kind of the imagery in my head. Just as I said, leaning on the piano and just the two of you having at it. A nightingale sang in Berkeley Square. That is just so East Coast somehow.
Yeah, that's a beautiful song.
It
That's
is.
a
Yeah.
gorgeous song. Yeah,
Manning
absolutely.
Sherwin, Eric Maschwitz. Lovely singing by Gary Wood. He has a perfect voice for these tunes. I'm saying to myself here. He's a natural. And you are a natural at the piano. See, this is the thing that still drives me crazy. You're a professor. You're a professional trombonist. And, after a show, you can go over to the club and walk out with $60 worth of tips for just hanging out at the piano. Crazy.
Well, we do what we can. It's all.
Boy,
I'm
do I
I'm
know. Yeah.
just grateful to be. I tell the students, you're so lucky to be musicians. It's a gift. So
Hmm.
many people have jobs and they just go to them
Yeah.
and whatever. We're so grateful, and so you just want to work hard, do the best you can, and develop your abilities to whatever extent you can, and share it with others, and that's all.
And also, I want to just mention that the last little tune I hit, so we can kind of wind down the CD
Yeah,
itself, Lady Bird, um, and again more scat from Wood, wonderful scat, a really nice scat.
yeah,
But I think what you just described, to get back to what you were saying, is yes, we are lucky
yeah,
because art, those of us in art of really just about any kind, we are saved. We're not escaping into it, but we're saved by it, I think.
yeah.
Look at what's going on around us, in the past 5, 6 years, let alone in the past couple of weeks.
No,
It's chaos and madness, and people in general have a hard time processing all of this, and we somehow are more stable. I hope I'm not wandering here, but there's something very
no. Thanks.
stabilizing about art.
And can we share this? Can we share this world with others? This beauty and this tragedy. It's the whole thing
Yeah.
in the sound.
Yeah.
You know,
So I've
it's
I've I've felt really lucky, even though it's hell making a living and paying the rent and stuff. From my point of view as a freelancer, it's hand to mouth all the time. But the point is that I'm enjoy every single day of my life.
yeah.
And you
No,
and I both know we see people walking around like zombies out there.
yeah,
They just have no idea how to be happy. Okay.
yeah. No, we're so fortunate, and I have to. I what you're doing right now, because I'm sitting on the Atlantic Ocean, you're sitting on the Pacific Ocean. Um, but this is a great gift you're giving to us musicians. You're connecting us, and you're giving us a forum in which we can express what we're doing. So I'm extremely. I was. Your email came out of the blue, and it was like, wow, this is really cool. I would love to share this with someone. So I want to thank you. What you're doing is a great gift.
Well,
You know,
thank you. And it is important for us to talk shop among ourselves and among a larger audience. Just the shop talk is so fascinating and interesting for the public at large, but also for our profession to see how we all work our craft and our goodies. So thank you very much. What else have I? Do you have a final plea to mankind before we before we lock it down?
yeah, um, at Interlaken, where I grew up, there's in the Kresge Auditorium overlooking it says dedicated to this was built in the 40s. This I remember because there's big windows. Maybe some of your listeners studied in Interlaken. Many
Sure.
people have been through there. I spent my first 18 summers of my life there.
How lucky is that?
Yeah, dedicated to the promotion of world friendship through the universal language of the arts. That's what it
Bingo.
says.
That says
And
it all.
that's how I would leave it. There's nothing to add.
Okay, but I'm going to add something. I'm going to do a little review. But the point is this CD speaking about a gift to the arts and a little bit of everything. This gives us a huge overview of who you are and who Gary Wood is, and the artistic levels and the just plain wonderful tunes that you do together. Again, just that joy and camaraderie and colleagueness, if you will, not to be too corny, of making music together. Um, Philip Swanson, American composer, proud to say. 2019 MSR Classics release and all this stuff, how to get the CD and all that good stuff, and the video, our interview, and all that will go up at performingartsreview.net. Wonderful CD. I just am all. You think I'm helping? You're helping me because I thought I kind of knew the repertoire as a critic over the years. Uh, not even close. So for me, it's been this just huge joy to discover all of this amazing repertoire from all of you. Now that we're passing compliments back and forth, that's been the great the great thing for me. Anyway, 2019 MSR Classics release, Aviary. I think people have got that clear now. Aviary, birds and poetry and song with baritone Gary Wood and Philip Swanson at the piano. It's a sweet one. I think I'm done. Many thanks for the good chat.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor and a privilege. The next time I'm in California, my brother lives in Carmel. I'll look you up.
You do it.
Yeah.
You do it. Santa Barbara's a pretty nice place.
Yeah, not bad.
Yeah.
You could do worse.
Okay. See you, Phil. Thank you again. Bye bye.
Dan. Good care.